What's good, everybody? My name is Alckemy. Welcome to the channel. Today we've got a couple of basses today since it's relatively simple, and it sounds like this. As you can probably tell, it's inspired by Rezz, which she thankfully has a very simple approach to making bass. Now, by all means, again, I am not Rezz and neither are you, so this shouldn't sound exactly like her. However, I'm going to show you a couple of skills that you can use in order to achieve a cool kind of bit crush bass kind of like this. But before we get started, I recently put out a new drum pack that I think is totally awesome. The drums that you hear in this project file are straight from that, and you can find that in the description in my website. Definitely go check it out. I think that you'll enjoy that. Okay, so the key components to this bass are a sine wave, distortion, and bit crushing, or downsampling particularly. And there's a couple of key quirks that really make this work, and we're going to talk about that right now. So bass number one is pretty straightforward. I know that it seems like quite a few things, but that's because I was trying to experiment with different textures. But in its own right, it sounds like this. And what we pretty much want to do is just grab ourselves a sine wave, just like this, and then we want to add in a little bit of FM to both. And this actually is completely optional, because if you listen to this on its own with the processing, you might even argue that it sounds better, or depending on what it is that your taste is like. But for the sake of variation, we're going to go ahead and add just a little bit of FM to the oscillator, and it's just kind of sitting on its own, just like that. We're going to have a short envelope with a small decay, and these are kind of arbitrary. The first one is actually in key, as you can see, and the second one is just for texture. Now, we want to make sure that we're not driving this with FM all the way, because it's going to kind of derail the pitch. However, if you kind of set a random harmonic and even play around with like detuning or spreading the voices out or something, then sometimes it can give you an interesting texture to be a little bit different than a typical bit crush bass. Now, the most important part of this actually are these two effects here, which is the bit crusher and the filter. And one of the easiest ways to achieve this is to actually have a high resonant low pass filter that is a short cutoff with a short envelope, and that's going to give us this sound. And the reason why this works is because of the high resonance. Whenever you kind of filter it through a bit crusher, it kind of gives it that vocally kind of sound. You can also use a formant filter, and there's a lot of other ways to do that. But if you think about what a formant filter is, it's just a filter with a bunch of resonances and all that, depending on where it is that you place it. Now for this, something that I was experimenting with is trying to get the right kind of vowel, and something that you can experiment with is either using an envelope on the downsample, or you can automate the mix. You can try the bit crushing, but that will kind of destroy it pretty hard once you get past like 4 bits. So I would recommend kind of just seeing what it sounds like and experimenting on your own. The other stuff after this is kind of just trying to make it sound a little bit louder and a little bit more interesting. So there's a chorus on the mid band that kind of just looks like this, and that's just giving us a little bit more stereo and a little bit more interest on the mid. We're barely boosting the high end just to make it a little bit more crunchy. And then this is just for texture, and I would actually argue that this isn't necessary, but it's the same bass but pitched up 12 semitones or an octave to just, again, add a little bit of texture on top. The only thing we have after that is some saturation, and then we're sending it through a limiter to where we're boosting the gain. The other stuff that we can add outside of this are optional, so we can add in some more bit crushing if we want to make it a little bit more crunch. You shouldn't even be able to tell, honestly. It's just a little bit more dirty. And then finally, we can add some saturation at the end to make it a little bit more beefy. But you can see that I'm being very sparse with this and just pushing it ever so slightly. Together with that, it's a pretty simple beat. It's just a kick snare mid-tempo pattern. And we'll talk about the hats after the bass, just because why not? But this pretty much sounds like this. I would say that this bass is actually over-engineered, because I wanted to show you another simple version of this that's even easier to do. So if we just take a sine wave, which it just sounds like this, whenever you add bit crushing to it, there's a couple of things on here that you can use to get kind of a similar effect. So for one, the downsampling would be the clock. And the second thing would be placing the distortion after the downsampling and manipulating the drive of the shape with an LFO. Now on top, you can add in just a little bit of the same thing where we have a chorus on the midband, some dynamics on the top end, and then a ring mod up top to give it a little bit of movement or a little bit of extra interest. It doesn't really matter. It's kind of a means of like, do you want to spread it out? Do you want to make it like have some kind of cool fuzzy top end? You can kind of play with all different kinds of effects that are interesting to you. Don't really worry about getting it right. But this is even easier than the other bass that we just covered. And I kind of wanted to show you how you can get a lot of diversity or a lot of variation just from a couple of simple effects. Now the reason why you might want to use one or the other is you might want a cleaner sound, or you might want something that's a little bit thicker and taking it more of the stereo field. Of course you can always EQ, but I wanted to show you a couple of different approaches to these. Now before we end the video, I guess one thing that I'll talk about is how to just make really easy shakers. And the only thing that there is to it is this is the exact same patch, but throw some noise into a generator and have a high pass filter, and then you want to set up an LFO pattern kind of like this. If you want it to be on grid, then just split this between 2 points and have a tall one and a middle one. And that's pretty much the main part of your shaker. And then using a little bit of chorus at a full mix will kind of spread it out. Then if you want to have a larger shaker, or kind of more like a ksh, ksh, then you take the same thing, but you slow it down a little bit, and then you pull back on the filter. Together with the sidechain combined from the kick and snare, you kind of have that nice rolling feel, and it's pretty simple to make. If you're interested in learning about more drums and how they're made in Faceplant, I've got a masterclass currently available that if you are an Arcana member, you currently have access to. It's still going underway. We actually are going to cover shakers and claps and snares, or rim shots rather, and stomps and all kinds of other stuff as of late, but I hope that you guys are really looking forward to that. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys watching. Rezz is really awesome, and I love that her music sounds so good, but it's so simple to kind of put together in that sense. If you guys have any questions, let me know in the comment section, and be sure to like the video. I'll see you guys in the next one.